Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Raju from the Intercivilizational Dialogue Project. And about 3 months or so ago, we interviewed Dr. Anthony Monteiro in the lead up to Trump becoming the President of the United States. And now it has been about 2 months since Trump took office. And what we want to do today is kind of look at these 2 months, see how they have been because a lot has happened. And things are happening at such a rapid pace that people around the world are trying to catch up and make sense of what is happening in American society. So, welcome, Dr. Montero.
Thank
And
you very much. Pleasure to be with you.
I was going to ask you some specific questions, but as we were talking before this, I thought maybe it's worth it to just start off by asking you more generally how you view these past 2 months, just to give people a sense of how it looks like, from within America, seeing all these changes that the Trump administration is making.
Yeah, and I have to admit that in a lot of ways I'm confused uh, about Trump, about his administration, and really what their objectives and aims are. And there's so many moving parts
Mhm.
because this administration is not operating only from the standpoint of the US politics and the struggles here, but the
Mhm.
global situation, which is changing very rapidly. Uh, so every day I wake up, I look at the news, I read the newspapers, and honestly, I try to understand it all and try to make sense of all these moving parts. And I think in some ways we have not reached that point where we can make sense of all of this
Mhm.
uh, because this administration and Trump himself uh, don't make sense and they do contradictory things and say contradictory things.
Right.
But, yeah. But one thing is very clear. Um, I don't know that we've ever had a presidency like this, ever.
Mm.
I don't know that the nation has ever faced a political crisis like this. And something that is seldom spoken about these days. I don't know if the American people have ever been so discontented and angry at the
Mhm.
political and economic leadership of the country.
Mhm.
Uh, so I'm trying to make sense of it as we go along. Uh, and yeah, that's where I
Yeah.
am.
Right, right. So, yeah, I want to, come back to that point you raised about how the American people are viewing what is happening. And that, of course, we have to take a longer view of the situation rather than just these past 2 months. But before that, I thought maybe I would touch upon a few specific aspects of the Trump administration and see how you view them. And the first one that I wanted to ask you about is the question of war and peace. And Trump, as we know and we discussed last time, ran as a peace candidate. And even after taking uh, power, after being in office, he has talked about peace, often in contradictory ways, but certainly in Ukraine, his efforts have been towards getting a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. He talks about withdrawing from NATO, and I think surprisingly for many of us, he was talking about denuclearization
Mhm.
talks with Russia and China. But then, of course, the recent news of his bombing of Yemen, as well as his green light to Israel to continue its genocide in Palestine. And, his talking in a way that's warlike in West Asia. So I wanted to get your view on how you see this contradictory way in which he's approaching the question of war and peace.
Yeah, well, he obviously has what could be called a 19th century perspective of great powers deciding what the world will look like.
Mm,
Um, Obviously, the 19th century deployment of this great power strategy were colonial powers.
mhm,
Uh, there was no independent India, no independent China. Uh, Russia had not had its revolution, and there hadn't been the anti colonial movements.
mhm,
So, this great powers thing and his idea that Russia, China, and the United States can together reach a detente and even denuclearize or cut their military budgets by 50% uh, is, kind of a worldview that he proceeds from. But then when it comes to West Asia, uh, he is without, it seems, a human feeling when it
mhm.
comes to a genocide and the killing of children, and even the bombing of Yemen. They bombed civilians,
Right.
you know, and he seems to be unmoved by any of this. Uh, but, you know, there's some ways that we might explain this Western Asia thing, and this I think goes back to the Indo European alliance, Indo Western Asia alliance, economic corridor, I think they would call it.
Right.
India, Israel, uh, the United States, and Western Europe, forming it would seem, a counter both to the G7, G20 group and to the BRICS.
Mhm,
And um, this idea of a detente or establishment of diplomatic relationships between Israel and Arab states, such as Saudi Arabia,
mhm,
and others, of course. Uh, and this would isolate Iran, who were part of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
mhm,
So he feels that to achieve that,
mhm.
uh, as a counterweight to BRICS and I guess to China and the Belt and Road, uh, that the Palestinians have to be so called put in their place by any means necessary.
Mhm.
Uh, but having said all of that, before he took office, he reposted this tweet from
Mhm.
Jeffrey Sachs,
I remember, yeah.
hmm which attacked Netanyahu, attacked Israel, and came out against a war with Iran.
Mhm.
So, and then he sends this guy Weiskopf, even before Trump takes office,
Mhm.
uh, to force Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire.
Mhm.
So everybody's saying, "Oh wow, he seems to be doing the right thing when it comes to Ukraine,
Right.
normalization of relations with Russia, even taking the position that it was the Biden administration that provoked the war, not Putin, and all of that." So you could assume we were on the cusp of something really new and really significant
Right.
from the standpoint of war and peace. And then he goes into this bombing of Yemen.
Mhm.
Now, and then rearms the Israelis and gives them the green light to begin bombing again in Gaza
Right.
and killing children, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But then it seemed to have uh, stopped suddenly. He bombed Yemen,
Mm-hmm.
seems one day. The Yemenis responded, the
Yes.
Houthis responded by attacking the aircraft, this USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier, and the aircraft carrier group retreated from where they were positioned in the Red Sea.
Mm.
And the Israelis, you know, had this, it seems, one day of bombing, and of course, the cutting off of the aid coming into Gaza, but it's not the same sustained bombing that we saw uh, before the ceasefire.
Right.
So, where all of this is leading, it's hard to say. And it's kind of Trump, I'm going to show you how powerful I am, but yet I don't want an all-out war in
Mm.
West Asia.
Right.
I don't think he does. I don't even think he wants a war with Iran, although he talks a lot,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so, in terms of war and peace, uh, what we can say is that the Trump administration and Trump himself are contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they seem not to fully understand the dimensions of the vast changes that have taken place in the world. Uh, and, if he thinks that the U.S. policy in Western Asia can continue to be based upon Israel, and I really don't think he does. I think if he had his druthers, he would prefer Saudi Arabia
Mm. Interesting.
uh, to even Jordan and Egypt. I think he sees Saudi Arabia, its leadership, its resources, its you
Right.
know as more important than Israel. And of course, he cannot fail to know that Israel is in a crisis of disintegration.
Right.
So yeah, that's on War and Peace. He is not quite who we thought he was,
Mm.
but he is not yet Joe Biden.
Right. Right. So I wanted to pick up on that last point you made about the relationship of the United States to Israel,
Mhm.
which is a very special relationship.
Yes.
Um, and a lot of people, I think, are trying to explain, people who are sympathetic to Trump, but do not like his actions in West Asia, are trying to explain the actions as the influence of the Israel lobby inside the United States. And I wanted to get, because, but on the other hand, clearly the actions of Trump are in stark contrast to what the foreign policy elite of the United States has been doing and wants, including voting in the UN with Russia
Mhm.
and North
Yeah.
Korea,
Mhm.
which I mean was unbelievable to see.
That
Uh,
was unbelievable. Yes, yes.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I wanted to see what you think of that explanation, whether you agree with it or you think this is really Trump's own thinking that is guiding him on his actions in West Asia.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and this is always a matter of conjecture and speculation. How strong is the Zionist lobby, and how strong politically are the Zionists in the country these days? Uh, Frankly, if you ask me, Raju, I don't think the Zionist lobby and the Zionists
Hmm.
are as strong as they were 6 months ago, a year
Hmm.
ago.
Hmm.
I think they have suffered um, major political blows within the country because of their support of this genocide
Hmm.
and of the Netanyahu regime. So, how much influence it has over Trump, um, I would say less than they have had over Biden and the Democrats.
Mm.
You know, the Zionist lobby had attached itself a few decades ago to the Democratic Party. Uh, and certainly, in spite of the fact that one rich Jew who owns casinos in Las Vegas gave a lot of money to Trump's re-election, I would say that most Zionists, and this
Mm.
is AIPAC and you know the Zionist lobby,
Mhm. Mhm.
can't trust and don't trust Trump.
Mm.
And they saw the way he exerted his influence with Weizsäcker and forcing Netanyahu to accept
So
a
Witkoff, Steve Witkoff?
Witkoff,
Mhm.
yes, I'm sorry,
No, no.
Witkoff, you know, forcing Netanyahu to accept what he said he would never accept.
Right.
And that was a ceasefire, which, you know, in another way was accepting that Israel had not and probably will never defeat Hamas,
Mm.
you know? And then they have, when they saw what happened in the White House uh, with Trump and Zelensky from the president of Ukraine
Mhm.
and J.D. Vance, and that beat down and humiliation of Zelensky, and would he do something similar, maybe not as public, to Netanyahu?
Mm.
Netanyahu has been a um, a difficult problem for the American ruling elite. What do they do with him?
Mm.
And now the whole question might be resolved by the Israeli people by the political crisis there. But yes, the just back to the question. Yes, Zionists are very, very powerful, but I would say not as powerful as they were 6 months ago, a year ago, and certainly not 5 or 10 years ago.
Okay. Okay. So let me move on and ask you about the American universities, because that's another very public area where Trump's actions have been noticed, including his withdrawal of funding, federal funds from Colombia. Um, and, the American university, I think we've talked about before, is a central part of the American state. And the way that Trump is approaching the American and academia as a whole um, has, I think is watched around the world because these are also places where people around the world go to. A lot of people really interact with the US through the American university.
Yes.
And I can, in academic spaces, even in India, there's a lot of discussion on what's happening in the universities. And
Almost as though it's happening to them in India.
right, right. Oh, yes, yes. I could tell you stories. Yeah. They're more concerned with that than they're,
Yeah.
though I have to say some people see in it an opportunity for Indian universities to do better than they've been doing. Um, but I think maybe in the Guardian there was an article, and I forget the exact phrasing of it, but essentially it argued that the American universities are dead or are dying. And I wanted to, again, get your view on how you view the conflict between academia and this administration, and really the kind of crisis in these universities.
Well, I guess I'd have to begin by saying that throughout Trump's 2024 campaign and then his inaugural speech, he made it clear that he was going after the elites,
Hmm.
that part of his domestic agenda, with all of the craziness and all of the talk that he, engages in, he sees himself as bringing the globalists neoliberal elites down. Uh, and of course, one of their strongholds are the American universities. And the American universities, I don't know what the case is in India, but the elite American universities are an unbelievably powerful force in the United States.
Hmm.
I mean, and you know, you were here, Nanditha was here. Uh, I don't know if you really understood what you were looking at. I didn't always understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But as you point out, the universities are connected to the US state. Trump, and this is the whole thing of Elon
Musk.
Musk and the kind of rearranging the government bureaucracy. At essence, it is Trump's politically rearranging American politics
Mm-hmm.
by bringing down the elites who call themselves liberal and, you know, uh, bringing them down um, and using the power of the government to do that. And but he does not make a clear enough separation, and maybe he doesn't know how to, maybe he doesn't have time to, but between student protesters and the people who run these universities. But the target are the elites.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because these universities in many ways are huge think tanks financed by the government,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as well as preparing future leaders and cadre of the state.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the way I see that. Columbia University was threatened with the government withholding $400 million, which raises a hell of a question. What is that money for? You know, Columbia has one of the largest endowments of any university in the world and in the history of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so, why does it need all of this money from the government? And what research is being funded? Well, we do know the majority of it is weapons and war
Mm-hmm.
research for war. But what else? And so Trump is saying, I'm not going to fund universities like Harvard and Columbia and other places uh, while you all wage war against me and my movement.
Mm-hmm.
So he is fulfilling a certain promise to seek revenge against those elites. But you know, you made a statement that in the Guardian article where they say that the American universities are dying or are already dead. I think I would agree with that. Um, you know, these are havens for elites that are not required to do very much of anything uh, and get paid, and they are really uh, apparatchik of the state and ultimately of the major party of the state, the Democratic Party. So I see it as an anti-elite move on his part. It's part of a wider attack upon elites who use the government and the government bureaucracy to advance themselves individually, but to advance the policies of the neoliberal, globalists, and frankly, the neocons and war makers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that's very interesting.
Oh,
And
can I just say one other
yeah,
thing?
go ahead.
And to destabilize society itself with the various theories like postmodernist theory, uh, critical race theories, uh, and to use these ideas to mobilize young people to attack the enemies of the deep state.
Mm.
While so many people think, oh no, they're fighting for the rights of black people. Oh no, this is a fight for the civil rights of trans and LGBTQ people. No, no, it's not. It's a very sophisticated move to create an ideological climate for young people, especially those in universities, to attack the working class and to destabilize society politically in the interest of the American empire. And I use the word the globalists, but that's just another way of talking about the defenders and apparatchik of the US empire.
Now that's very interesting because you're really arguing that the way one should view what Trump is doing to the American university is not, as the mainstream media is reporting, an attack on free speech, but it's really
Yes,
part of the ideological conflict between
yes,
the Trump movement and the American elite.
yes.
And I wonder if you could talk, because I think leading up, maybe, 3 months ago when we had talked about the forces that shaped the Trump coalition, which more and more seems to be the working class.
Yes.
Um, Back then we were talking about how the working class has moved more and more towards the Trump movement, and the educated elite has concentrated itself in the Democratic Party. And so these theories you were saying, postmodernism and uh, critical race theory and LGBTQ queer theory. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how how to view that ideological conflict. Um, I don't know how to put that, but particularly given the way uh, the or from the standpoint of the working class, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your questions because you're helping me to think through these things in ways that I found very difficult otherwise. So yeah, no, yes, I agree with you that we have to begin with the fact that Trump is viewed as an enemy of the ruling elite.
Hmm.
There's no two ways about it. Not only did he win the majority of the working people, but he won the majority of young people.
Right.
He won the majority of women in spite of the abortion issue.
Yeah.
He won uh, a significant part of Black people. And very significant given, how the Trump movement is represented by Trump himself, as a white people's movement.
Right.
But all of these parts of the American people, especially the working people, came together in a movement against the ruling elite, including the blackness leadership class. Um, so Trump cannot be viewed as a Republican.
Hmm.
Uh, he fractured the Republican Party coalition and took control of it. So those Republicans who oppose him keep quiet because they realize the vitality and strength of his movement.
Right.
But what did all this say? And Raju, this is something that we talked about more in the election and leading up to the election is the American people continually say in poll after poll and credible poll after credible poll, upwards of 80% of the American people say the American government does not care about people like them.
Hmm.
Uh, 70%, this is the New York Times polling, which is seen as very credible. 70% of them say that the government has to be fundamentally reformed.
Mhm.
15% of that group say that the whole government has to be overturned and something new built up. Other polls have showed that 25% of the American people say they would support the use of violence to change the government. Um, Now, that is the foundation, the political foundation. He won all of the working class.
Mhm.
One of his staunchest opponents in the trade union movement, the head of the United Automobile Workers, came out about a week ago saying that he supports Trump's tariffs
Ah.
to bring automobile production back into the United States.
Mm.
This is Sean Fain. I mean, he called Trump a scab, an enemy of the working class. Now he's, at
Ah.
least on the question of reindustrialization
Mm.
and the auto industry, supporting Trump. Um, so the economic crisis, the growing inequality, the decimation of the US working class. If I could just say this, Raju, and I know it's almost impossible for someone in India to understand really what happened to the American working class.
Mm.
Up until the 1970s, in particular, but certainly by the time of the 2000s, the American working class was viewed by Lenin, by Mao, by everybody as one of the great working classes in the world.
Mhm.
Highly disciplined, educated, highly organized. That the success story of American manufacturing and industry is rooted in the working class.
Mm.
That class, with deindustrialization and globalization, was brought to its knees. In cities and towns that were known for their great factories, for their great working class, for the prosperity of the working class because of their unions, because of the profitability of these industries.
Mm.
You know, working people were buying homes, working people were sending their kids to college, working people had health care. In a matter of a couple of decades, the American working class was brought to its knees. And where they were once prosperous, they're now impoverished.
Mm.
Trump won them.
Yes.
He won them. And it's not that he's so charismatic or so articulate. It's the working class on its own concluded that the party, the Democratic Party, which once was the party of working people, had turned against working people with these trade deals, with the deindustrialization, with all of these theories, queer theory, which is more than homosexuality. It's a theory of society. With all of these theories that are all anti-working class and all anti-revolutionary, that whole um, political movement of the Democratic Party was completely rejected. So the country is politically realigned at this time. Where all of this will lead, we don't know. I have certain speculations about possible outcomes, but the defeat of the Democratic Party last November was nothing short
Mm.
of miraculous. So much so that even Democrats are questioning whether or not the Democratic Party can ever become competitive and a force electorally on a national scale.
Hmm. Well, maybe at the end I'll ask you, where you see this going.
Yes.
There are a couple of questions I wanted to ask you before that. One is that we had discussed the different forces around Trump. And I think at that time you had said that you don't see people like Marco Rubio playing such an important role in the foreign policy. And I think that has been borne out to some extent, where they're sort of just doing what Trump wants. But I wanted to get your assessment of that now. Uh, where do you see people like, say, Steve Bannon, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk? Are these people who do not have much power of their own and are enacting essentially are enacting what Trump sees as um, the future, Trump sees as what needs to be done, or are they influencing and shaping the Trump administration in significant ways?
Yeah. Well, I think, you take a Tulsi Gabbard, leave Steve Bannon aside for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Tulsi Gabbard or a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or
Mm-hmm.
Kash Patel, even Marco Rubio and them, when they signed up to be a part of, or Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, when
Mm-hmm.
they signed up to be a part of the Trump administration, I think they knew out from the outset that they were signing up to carry out Donald Trump's policies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, those people literally see him as a unique figure in world history. Now, I don't agree with them, but they knew that Trump would govern or would rule in the same way that, let us say, Napoleon ruled.
Mm-hmm.
Napoleon's great statement was, I am the state and the state is me. Uh, but it is, in a certain sense, a presidential dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
And, and the so-called liberals and constitutional scholars have a point when they say that Trump is governing outside of the rules, the constitutional rules, and the practices of American governance, of American democracy. Um, and his intent is to bring it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And, these weak people like a Hegseth, like a Rubio, even like a Tulsi Gabbard, they signed up to carry out his policies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I can see all of them uh, gaining something politically in the future. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but nonetheless, yeah. Now, Steve Bannon is this ideologue, political activist who sees Trump, like the rest of them, as a special man in history.
Mm-hmm.
And if you listen to Steve Bannon, he is straightforward about that.
Mm-hmm.
But he sees Trump as leading what, in effect, is a revolutionary undoing of the US state.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Bannon portrays himself and says of himself that he is a Leninist, that he, that he wants, like Lenin, he wants to bring the state down. And he sees Trump as that figure, that unique figure who can carry that out.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is and this is why Rubio may not be around that long, um, is that Trump's foreign policy, especially Trump's attack upon the Western alliance,
Hmm.
uh, the transatlantic alliance, they call it, and NATO,
Yes.
uh, that is nothing short of unbelievable.
Yes.
Trump is literally undoing 80 years of policy and institutions established after World War II.
Yeah.
And of course, without the United States, Europe is nothing,
Hmm.
you know? And then his preferring Putin over any of the Western leaders, Macron, Starmer, any of them. So, so there is something to this, um, quote, revolution as Bannon would describe it. The other one that I find very interesting is Scott Ritter,
Okay. Hmm.
who's a big time podcaster, 24/7 on somebody's podcast somewhere in the world,
Yeah.
uh, who had passionately claimed that Trump was a revolutionary, that all that he was doing was a revolution, and so on and so forth. And then with Trump's attack upon Yemen and giving the go ahead to the Israelis to resume bombing in Gaza,
Hmm.
uh, Ritter said, "Well, I don't know where this guy is going and what he's standing for, and so on." But you do have these people in the Trump movement, near to the Trump movement, who see him as a revolutionary and see him as bringing the state and the bureaucracy of the state down.
Hmm. 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 Would you include Elon Musk in that?
I don't know. I don't know how to read Elon Musk. Again, you know, so many of these people are, their identities are unclear and they're always changing. And Elon Musk, uh, I guess he's been successful in business, and but we don't know really who's all behind him anyway. I mean, this is
Right.
more than an individual, but I just don't know where he's coming from, what his aims are. Uh, but he becomes this figure that the media enjoys attacking.
Yes.
And of course, for Trump, because Trump does, plays games with the media. He says something that he doesn't mean, so the media will have a story for that day. Uh, Elon Musk is who they can talk about while perhaps other things are taking place,
Hmm.
especially Trump has to find some kind of detente and rapprochement with Russia and China. Uh, what all of that will mean, it's hard to say.
Hmm.
Trump, I don't think Trump has the strongest hand on the global scale. He's very strong in U.S. politics. He is the strongest figure in the whole political situation in the United States. Uh, and he does have an offensive against the state going, and most of the ruling elite fear him, uh, and they can't figure him out at this point.
Hmm. Hmm. Uh, One question I wanted to ask you was about how you see his economic policy. You mentioned the support of the UAW leadership and his obviously his tariff policy has been under discussion. But I think earlier on you also mentioned this how he wants to build an alternative to BRICS. And obviously, a lot of people have been talking about the possibility of de-dollarization, which he's against, or at least he says he's against.
Yeah.
He wants the dollar to be strong. Um, in terms of how it's affecting the American domestic economy, maybe it's too soon to say. I don't know, but I just wanted to see how you view the effect of his economic policies, whether you see them really as going towards reindustrialization, and also whether you see them as having a big effect on the global economy or not.
Well, he does want to reindustrialize the country. He wants capital to reverse its flow out of the country to come back to the country. American capital, but he doesn't care. Chinese capital, Saudi capital, invest in America,
Hmm.
build in America, you won't face tariffs. Um, I think, and that's part of, the cutting of the military budget might fall within that. Now, a lot of these tariffs are more a threat to countries and a way that he can possibly make a deal with them. Uh, Tariffs against Mexico and Canada are unsustainable. They only make Canadians and Mexicans more angry.
Mm.
Uh, but he sees this as reversing the neoliberal outflow of capital from the United States to China, to Vietnam, the Philippines, Canada, Mexico, and so on. He wants to reverse that. Um, but then the question of a strong dollar,
Hmm.
um, which he sees as placing the US dollar and the US economy in a strong position vis-a-vis Europe, China, and other countries. However, um, this is not the 19th or even the early 20th century. The US is the reserve currency. Now, as such, that keeps the dollar strong. But tariffs, if they are carried out, means that a lot of nations will abandon the dollar
Hmm.
because of the fear of sanctions and tariffs and even seizing of their dollars that are held in US banks.
Right.
So if he thinks that it will be, tariffs will be the instrument to bring capital back in the United States and that the US dollar will remain strong because it is the reserve currency of the world, I think the contradictions are unresolvable.
Mm.
Uh, and you get a lot of writers, commentators, who, when they look at it, say it just doesn't make sense. I would agree with that.
Mm.
Uh, the United States will have to accept what multipolarity means in economic terms, you know, and he's going to have to deal with a very, very strong China, a very strong emerging India, and what looks to be about to occur, a detente economically and politically between India and China,
Hmm.
uh, a stronger Russia, and then, of course, you got BRICS,
Right.
which, if it's anything, I should say, it really is a coming together of the most powerful Asian economies. And I include Russia as an Asian economy. And then you throw Indonesia in there, China in there, and then all of these associated members
Right.
of of BRICS. And so you have most of the most powerful economies in the world, and certainly in Asia. So uh, I don't see his policy working. Maybe partially, maybe some auto plants will come back in. Maybe there will be Chinese investment in manufacturing in the United States, but it will require not just one Trump administration, but multiple administrations. Oh,
Hmm.
by the way, he's talking about changing the Constitution so he can run for a third time or be elected
Wow.
a
Well,
fourth time, by the way. I mean,
all right,
serving.
fourth time, right? Serve the third time. Wow. Well, what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Montero, is really that to some extent things have happened as we talked about them some months ago, that Trump really is taking down the American state
I
in a
think
way.
so.
Yeah,
Or at
and
least weakening it, severely
right,
weakening. And the elites which control the state,
right,
he's thrown them into a state of shock and uncertainty.
right. And panic really. You get the
Panic, yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe he's not, or he's hesitated in some cases on the question of war and peace, but still one cannot forget some of the steps he's made in U.S. foreign policy, which I don't know if I ever imagined, the kinds of things, especially on the issue of Ukraine. So I guess my last question to you would be, uh, how you see this going forward. I think you mentioned you had some ideas on the possibilities, whether you would agree with a Steve Bannon or a Scott Ritter that this is a revolutionary change that is happening, or whether there are other possibilities.
Yeah. I think I said this when we had our previous interviews. You know, at the level of the social, political, ideological uh, situation going forward, I see three possibilities. One, that we're in a pre revolutionary situation.
Hmm.
And by revolution, I'm not talking about a repeat of the Russian Revolution. I'm talking about a very broad democratic movement that uh, constantly eats away at the power of the state until there is no option but for the state either to collapse or those who command it to make fundamental compromises and agreements with a mass of people who say, in the name of democracy,
Hmm.
a new state must be built. Uh, Already, some of this is implied in the polling data, as I mentioned. Uh, Significant numbers of American people would support and do support a fundamental change in the state. So, to me, uh, from the standpoint of the people, this looks like something of a pre revolutionary situation. I think this goes forward with or without Donald Trump. The second is that we could be on the verge of a civil war. How that will look in the United States is not the romanticized version that you see in movies. Um, the Midwest, that middle part of the United States, that part of the United States where most of the industry has been, and where the great farming agricultural part of the country is. All of this is pretty much in the middle of the country, and that's the part that has suffered the most. Uh, it is not beyond uh, our view that this part of the country, these people could rise up, and then the forces of the state and the political forces aligned with the state for whatever reasons could enter into prolonged conflict,
Mm,
military conflict.
mm,
The nation could experience this at a very high level, sometimes low level, but a violent confrontation
mm,
based upon political, differing political views. The country is already uh, split uh, between views of the country, and the working class tends to be on one side of this as a whole. But they're not the only player, so it could be a civil war situation. The other, which would flow from a civil war, or maybe not from a civil war, but because of the deterioration of the state, the collapse of the governability of the country.
mm,
Uh, what Karl Marx and Frederick Engels called the ruin of all classes. Uh, so, of the three, I think there's one positive, and that is the revolutionary democratic movement, and the other two are destructive possibilities. For the first to be actualized, in many ways, requires an ideological and political return to Martin Luther King in the period of the civil rights movement.
mm.
Uh, and Raju, you remember our conversation with James Lawson
Yes.
about the seizure of state power nonviolently, etc.,
Right.
uh, and how he referenced the Gandhian approach, the Indian approach, which could be a possibility in this country. And I think most Americans would prefer that. You
Mm,
know, that would mean tremendous levels of organization, consciousness, civil disobedience, uh, the unity of the working people with students and youth. And all of that is, really possible if you look at the situation in the country. So the revolutionary democratic situation would be the most optimal. The other two, which are highly possible and would be provoked by the ruling elite, are are not the ones that we would hope for.
mm. No, that's, I mean, it's just what you're describing really gets at the depth of the crisis that the country is facing. Um, and yeah, I guess I'm reminded of what Dr. Martin Luther King, I think, used to say at the end, that it's no longer between nonviolence and violence, but between nonviolence and non-existence.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, even though most quote leftists and quote Marxist Leninists uh, think that any revolution must include a violent seizure of state power, I think, and I agree with you, that, yeah, that's an option. But then I think the stronger option, because of the people, is the nonviolent seizure of power.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, well, I think we should stop here, but I have to say it's always very clarifying to talk to you. And it is really a lot to try and keep up with everything that's happening in American politics nowadays. But so thank you very much for doing this interview.